Hello, welcome back, everybody. You'll see we have becoming one of our regular guests now, Stuart Donald, whose specialty, maybe one of your specialties, his specialty is data and analysing that data and what can it tell us. And we've particularly covered PR versus first past the post in previous shows. So this time we've got a few bits of data that we just thought we'd throw at you and see what you make of them.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
This is an interesting website called the Equality Trust, and it comes from a book that Professor Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson did called The Spirit Level at 15. And I came across them because publishing pretty much one a day in the run-up to Christmas by the Bluesky site Inequality News. And I thought this is much more fun than an advent calendar. Equality graph.
It's interesting. I hadn't realised they were doing one a day up to Christmas. Actually, having heard that, Fiona, I'm now thinking, it's a bit like something out of Christmas Carol, isn't it? That Scrooge would do, all about how, inequality affects people.
Have you come across them before, Stuart? Is that a site you've looked at before?
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah, they helped me. They published some of my initial sort of articles on the link between first past the post and inequality. And I think they were pioneers maybe 10, 15 years ago in just bringing out just how relevant inequality is and how damaging it is. So yeah, they're great.
So the first one I'm going to do is just the first one they published. And this is just your sort of scene setter, really. And inequality is significantly and strongly associated with a whole range of health, social and environmental problems. So what we've got on what we're calling that the left-hand axis is the how the extent.
That's called the y-axis.
Oh, thank you, Professor Halliday.
But the one that goes up and down.
The uppy downy y-axis. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that will be is the index of health, social, environmental problems. So the higher up you are on that one, the more problems you've got. And the bottom axis, which is probably something like the x-axis, is it? That's income inequality. So immediately we can see right to the very furthest extreme with the most income inequality and the highest degree of social problems is the USA.
Yeah, it's interesting that wee bunch, isn't it, at the bottom? Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden.
Yeah.
And then you get over to Belgium, Netherlands, and then away at the other end, you've got the USA. Where are we?
We've got a lot of income inequality. We're third on most of these behind Israel and the USA. Yeah. And we're certainly not got anything to brag about when it comes to health, social or environmental problems either. Yeah. But that's the sort of scene setter. And there were 21 graphs, I think, that have been published so far. And a lot of them, it's obvious that, if you've got a lot of income inequality, you're not going to have good gender or race or educational equality. But there was a few that I thought was maybe slightly less obvious. So the first one I'm going to flash up is this. Recycling rates. Why would it be that the more unequal your income, the less recycling your country does? Because you've got USA there, really, really unequal. Not doing very well for recycling. Israel, dreadful for recycling. Mm-hmm. And then again, you've got Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, low inequality, really high.
Stuart, I'm sitting here chuckling, so I should explain to you. That is because Fiona is a recycling geek,
I'm a bit.
Whenever she goes abroad, and recently she's been to places like Norway and Sweden, Finland.
Denmark.
She sort of sends me back photos of, and look, here's the recycling, and it's great, and you get your token, and you go and spend it at the shop. So just to give you a bit of background there, but I mean, what occurs to me is though that if you've got countries like Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Sweden, Finland, who are benefiting overall, because of in terms of like social, environment. Maybe that also just means that you're more aware of things like doing a bit of good by recycling.
I mean, ultimately, I think that's right. It's I mean, I would never have thought of this, to be honest, as a way of measuring inequality, but it basically all comes back to fundamental well-being. And the previous graph we looked at, I mean, the key thing that really stands behind inequality is how involved is the state in organising, supporting, driving, stewarding that societies don't become fundamentally unequal, right? So again, I mean, I don't know to say that you can prove this out, but my theory would be, the lower well-being is, then the less engaged people are with the sort of like the altruistic that's implicit in this, right? And I suppose people of my generation and maybe older, we weren't born into recycling, right? So there's a sense that you're being altruistic, but you still have to educate people to do that. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, and it's interesting to listen to, Malcolm Offord, who has just obviously moved to reform, and his ambition with that is really the Tories are not a suitable home for what he calls centre-right politics, and he's classically sort of on the sort of like the Thatcherite mantra about release the individual, let the individual do stuff, complaining about the fact that just take Scotland alone, that we spend much more than we did 10 years ago in terms of public money. So the state spends much more, and this is inherently or implicitly a bad thing. Okay, for me, this is why inequality is such an important thing to tackle, because of how entrenched that view is in the UK, that if you get the state to do anything, it's necessarily going to be inefficient. Okay, whereas in every graph, I guarantee you're going to see Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Sweden, Finland, the countries that I associate as the UK's most relevant Northwestern European peers. All of them are going to be in the right place, and all of them have states that have remained involved successfully in managing inequality in their countries.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, the other one that strikes me up there, look at Germany.
Yeah.
Why have they got, they're sort of towards the middle in terms of the income inequality, not quite there, but way higher levels of recycling than anywhere else. What are they doing right, I wonder?
This is where we start cracking jokes in German accents and about what happens if you don't recycle you.
Yeah, that's right. I know. I wonder if it is that. I mean, but they've just got, have they not just got a really advanced or successful green movement, right? And whether that's
true.
The war and the consequences of all and so on. Because I mean, in the previous slide and here again, as you can see, amongst those peers of ours that have much better standards of well-being, right? And Germany is one of them. They're not as comfortable or successful at that, if you want, as the Scandinavians, but right enough in this measure. But they have had a really powerful, green movement. I mean, and the Green Party's been one of the most successful green parties, anywhere in Europe as well. So maybe the messaging behind that and its impact has contributed to that. So.
Yeah, cool. Okay, we're doing quite well with explaining these so far. The next one, basic level democracy, and this comes from the Economist's Democracy Index. And one of the things I found quite interesting about this, I mean, high at this point, you've got really high levels of democracy, the more equal you are. And there you've got the poor old USA at the worst end of the scale again. But look at New Zealand there. Mm-hmm. New Zealand wouldn't be somewhere that I thought of as having particular income inequality, but it must have, because it's in the sort of higher half of the graph. Yeah. And yet managing to maintain its democracy.
Yeah, it's a bit. I wonder what democracy means, though. Because, I mean, basically, if you're just talking about, I mean, you'd expect to find that on certainly these guys, their scale would favour PR over first past the post. But I think it's probably more than that. Maybe it gets into local democracy. But the thing about the stuff that Leslie Riddick talks about regularly about democratising, down to local levels and what she says and her evidence that shows that, in the Scandinavian countries, that the more it's devolved to local levels, then the better it is about decision-making around things like, heat pumps and so on. But so New Zealand is probably one of the most interesting countries in the electoral sort of system space, in that it's the only independent country, that has changed its system from first past the post to PR. Certainly in the West, right? And they did that in 1996 because it had the most horrendous experience with certainly, a Tory party that was never out of power. I think until then, from the war until 96, there was only 9 years when their Labour Party were in power. They had a very aggressive neoliberal adoption, a bit like us, but they got really upset about it, and they managed to force a referendum and won the referendum in 96. So I think that is probably, if this graph is from 2009, 2010, or maybe even if it's more recent, they are much newer into, operating under a PR environment. And so you wouldn't have expected yet that they would be achieving the sort of equality levels that you see in the Scandinavian countries that have had that at least.
Interesting. Yeah.
I wondered if it was to do with the fact that they've got sort of, indigenous populations that perhaps are not as well off as others, but maybe it's not. Maybe that's a more convincing argument that you've just given. I mean, the other one that strikes me as really weird there, Belgium. Why is Belgium's democracy so poor when it's the heart of the European Union?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, maybe it's, I don't know if it's anything to do with the sort of the two nation.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
But so they must have some way of calculating that what democracy means. But fundamentally, I mean, the Scandinavian countries are in the right place again, and we know that they've got PR, and we know that they have much more decentralized local authority power, consistently a model to follow, really, aren't they?
Yeah. So, even if one of the things that they took into account was how people feel in terms of the level of democracy. So less, more of an internalized kind of response. Because I can imagine in Belgium that business, because there's the two kind of nations within Belgium, that people might not feel that it's so democratic, even although it's a good enough, system. So I mean, as you say, Fiona, it will probably be in the book, and that might be
the devil in the detail.
Christmas list.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting. But then, France is not much better there. If you look at France just up from Belgium. Yeah. But and the UK again, not getting any medals for being either very democratic, and of course we're very unequal.
Yeah.
So, right, next one. Let's see, this one surprised me because I just thought, why would that be the case? But mental health stigma. Now, not mental health, not poor mental health, but the stigma around mental health is associated with income inequality. Why should that be, do you think? And we've got a whole load of extra countries in here, it looks like. We've got Lithuania, Latvia. We don't have the USA on this one. So this is difficulty talking to a person with a significant mental health difficulty is the y-axis. And
big spread as well, isn't there? There's a big spread in that. Yeah.
But the trend is that the higher the income inequality, the harder it is to speak to somebody with a mental health difficulty. I'm not seeing the connection there.
No, and this is the thing that's fascinating about their work, I find, because it's sort of trailblazed for everyone else, and I think even people like Danny Darling that have come to it then more with a social geography perspective. But it is uncanny, and every slide you look at, you sort of can't help but conclude, look, if you allow societies to suffer serious inequality, then everything is impaired. I mean, and the work I'm doing, like in parallel for stuff that I'm going to publish in Q1. But one of the big challenges is actually, whilst everybody knows inequality is bad, it's very difficult to sort of actually see it in action. What does it do? And I think some of that, and if there's a criticism of this book, it would be that it's compelling, but there's something that's not tangible enough about it to make it real. But this would be it. If you invest in a proper welfare state, right? Let's use that term without trying to sound like an old-fashioned socialist, because you get tarred with the wrong brush if you use that sort of language. You look at what the UK's done over the last 45 years. That we've invested every year for the last 45 years, something like 30% less than the average of our natural Northwestern European peers. That's the Scandinavian countries, the German-speaking countries, Benelux, France, and Ireland. 30% a year, every year less in social spending for the last 45 years. I mean, that's an astronomical sum of money to compound up every year, right? And this is why, again, Danny Darling's book that you don't want to read at Christmas, but it is, I would recommend it. Everybody should try and read it. Seven Children gives you some really powerful windows into what real misery means. The forgotten people that don't vote and that can't. You have to make choices between buying crayons for the kids and food and stuff like that. Really horrific stuff. it's that sort of thing. You think, well, why would anybody suffering that be concerned about how they speak to someone with a mental health difficulty or recycling? You know what I mean? Is that how we're supposed to? Is that how we're going to end up consuming this? That becomes maybe the orthodox way of understanding inequality, if we ever get there in the UK, because so I think it's all bound up with that.
That's kind of prompted me back to, you know, Dickens's Christmas Carol, really, because the amount of that's what I mean. It's about social inequality, that story, and you know, and a guy who's hoarding onto it in the way that billionaires are. Even I don't know if we've quite got to trillionaire yet, but billionaires are, and I mean, it's a bit what a billion is in terms of how much more it is even than a million is actually really difficult to get your head round, you know, and people are coming up with some good examples of it. But I mean, so it's interesting that, and I mean, Fiona has looked at these inequality graphs in more detail than I have, but I did have a quick look through some of them, and I was left with the impression that they're sort of painting a picture of a network of, well, I was going to say unintended consequences, but maybe that's not the right way to think about it. A network of consequences that are emerging from this growing inequality that, you know, Western countries are showing over the last 20, 30 years, something like that. And it's going to have, well, it is already having a big effect on our society. And as you say, it's really difficult to get your head around it. But these graphs certainly help with that. I mean, you know, it's like if you like graphs, because the three of us all like graphs. We all like graphs. So, you know, so I'll go look at those and go, my goodness, look at that. But that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work for most of the population. So it is important to kind of get images and stories round about that, and like that one you mentioned, Danny Dorling's book, you know, The Seven Children, that does it.
Right, and also, not to sort of like plug my research, but right, and just to your very point there about how do you actually communicate some of this stuff, not on this slide, unfortunately, because they're not there, but if you take the Anglosphere countries, and in the previous 2 or 3, but probably the next one as well, they are all near the UK, right? And what they have in common with the UK is that they too have a first past the post system. Our countries that only have 2 parties and in the neoliberal era have succumbed to the same, if you want, capture, right, of marketizing and privatizing and so on as the UK, which is very different from all the rest of these countries. So
that exactly sets up the final slide I've got, because it's on the biggie, infant mortality.
Right.
And look at there, we've got Canada, New Zealand, UK, Australia, USA, all the English speaking, all the former colonies, dare we say it, of the UK, all looking in the infant deaths per 1,000 live births. Canada surprised me, I have to say, but
why is that?
Just at how high their mortality, their infant mortality was, but
I would say that the main explanation for that would be that, you know, the first past the post system in the last 45 years has basically, you know, removed or compromised the progressive voice in those countries to the extent that they've made basically no impact, right? We know that ourselves from our Labour Party. The same has happened in all of these countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK, and the USA. We can talk about the other ones in a minute, but basically this is probably the most powerful. And I think this is, I mean, again, Danny Dorling has used this stat more than any others because people can relate to it. It's obviously a horrific thing, but you know, again, the gap though that you have to close. And again, I'm trying to do this with this work I'm doing. So, well, yeah, you can see how if you don't invest in health and social services and in society generally, that how that could mean poorer health outcomes, you know, none more tragic than children dying. And that's it though. And then the power there comes from the fact that, well, how come it is these countries with their mad 2-party systems seem to have this you know, dreadful stats compared to everyone else where, you know, they don't have 2 parties. They've got, you know, multiple parties that they operate in coalitions. The crucial thing there, I would say, is because in those coalitions there is either always or regularly a meaningful and effective progressive voice, then they protect and ensure that, you know, public spending remains at a level higher than it would be if that voice wasn't there. Okay, and that's it. You know, it's uncanny it can't be a cultural thing that somehow they're all related to the British Empire. So on. I mean, the link is really the electoral system.
And inequality, come back to income inequality as well. Those countries at that end with the worst results of child poverty are not poor countries. It's just that the wealth is concentrated in a tiny, tiny few and sod the rest of them,
Yeah.
So there you go. That set us up for Christmas.
I'm going to reread A Christmas Carol, I think, or, well, actually, to be honest, more likely to re-watch the Muppets Christmas Carol, but
The one thing I did actually reply to the Inequality News when they were posting these. Particularly, there was one on child poverty, and I said, "Is there any difference showing up between different parts of the UK?" And they said no. They actually directed me to Danny Dorning's work, funny enough. But that was the thing, when you look at a lot of these, you think, would we be any different? If we disaggregated the UK, would Scotland be in the same place in those graphs? Have you got any feel for that?
I mean, well, actually, not. Again, to cite Danny Dorling again, but I mean, he's just done a lot of work in the space, hasn't he? He actually uses Scotland and the performance of the Scottish Parliament. Believe it or not, he wouldn't have gleaned this from listening to the Scottish establishment talking about it as evidence. If you have a party that isn't, right, a fanatical neoliberal party, which is what we've had in the Tories since 2010, just through the measures that they've taken around the child payment, and there are 2 or 3 other things that they've done, they've been able to do relatively quickly. That's made a difference, and so child poverty is lower in Scotland than even places like Surrey, according to him, right, which he thinks is a really powerful stat. Which you think Surrey, belt, the second wealthiest region in the UK, the southeast of England, and he talks about this when he goes to talk to Labour Party's groups in the southeast of England, and he's saying, it's not obviously on behalf of the SNP. He's not an SNP supporter per se, but he's saying, look, the point is we've got evidence that this works, right? You can actually lift children out of poverty very quickly by just doing this. So it's not a pipe dream, it's not theoretical. It does work. Why would we not take it on? Of course, it can't be taken on because if the Labour or the Tory party are now reform, even worse, but even more extreme, were to embrace that, they run the risk of alienating the crucial sort of middle income voters that are going to look at this as profligate. Or they've been educated by the British establishment to book this as profligate, a wasteful money that is probably going to mean they have to pay more tax. So they don't dare. And this is like, it's that cycle of like being trapped in the 2-party system where it's so important for the parties now to appeal to this middle class band, small group of people, that they won't take these risks. But the evidence is under our noses.
That maybe brings us on actually to we have a recurring question that one of our viewers asks, and it's on that sort of, we've obviously shared your thoughts on a PR system, how that would be much better for us, but he has a concern. This is Hashbury, who watches all our stuff. So proportional representation for Westminster elections would be bad for Scotland, he thinks, because our share of the number of MPs that we would result would be a lot less, he thinks, because of the population share of Scotland rather than, relative to everybody else. And we've kind of responded to him going, does it matter? Because, under first past the post, we can't do anything anyway.
I sort of could understand because he said this a few times on a few occasions when we've been chatting on, when there's been a premiere going out, and I sort of understood, because when you see, BBC will have up, or someone will have up the latest polling for, for UK wide. So the only Scottish-only party, Scottish-based party that ever appears on it is the SNP, and it appears at about 3% of the vote, which is fair enough because they're looking at it in terms of the UK population, and I think that's where that kind of, having reservations about going to PR if one's main thing to achieve is get Scotland independent, because 3% of 650 MPs is about 20 MPs. So under first past the post, of course, the SNP can end up with over 40. I mean, obviously doesn't at the moment because they could end up with 9. So I could sort of understand that, and I think he's thinking, well, you have even less leverage, and so. But actually, I have no clue if that's a valid thing to way to think. So can you tell us?
Sure. I mean, and so absolutely, that's a spot on way of characterising it. So the appeal of first past the post today for us independent supporters is we know we get more seats than we might otherwise get. Okay, but so the way I would, through the work I've been doing, think about this then is to say, well, what actually do we get from having, as it was, 56 out of 59 MPs in Westminster? So that was straight after the independence referendum. So for those of us independent supporters, it's probably the worst time to have such a huge showing, to move the ambition. But in any case, I mean, we got nothing out of that. We because we had a Tory majority, and I would say that not even forget the SNP, but I mean, what have Scottish Labour been able to do? Really, even in my lifetime, they have gradually had to move more and more to the right, but Scotland has remained resolutely, committed to voting for parties that it believes are more socially democratic oriented, in maybe in the European sense. So that was the Labour Party and Tory in DRF, and since then it's been the SNP. We haven't really got anything out of it. So without being, sounding like I'm sulking about it, but there isn't. At what point is there on us having a huge representation in Westminster? We secured our Indie Ref. It appears now with hindsight opportunistically because of the way the Tories behaved towards us through the Scottish Parliament, and that's the way that the modern SNP seem to be driving that. And I'll say one other thing, and that is, although difficult to imagine, but if we did or we had been living in a PR context, right, then we probably would have had in the UK a Green Party, right? And again, we can't pretend that this is the linearly, if we just rolled back the years, that this would work out in this way, because everything changes with a different system. But you would have more parties, and therefore you would guaranteed have coalitions. If there was ever a case where, for example, the English Greens, as they exist today, were to do a deal with either Labour or the Lib Dems, they might need the support of a smaller SNP, and then they'd have to do a deal. And now, of course, the English Greens are supportive of Welsh and Scottish independence. They're supportive of decentralising and democratising across the UK. So it'd be a completely different context, right? So it's not. It wouldn't mean that necessarily independence is round the corner, but we would have a much different and arguably a healthier, probably more productive route to networking. The idea of independence into the dialogue. As long as we've got first past the post, we'll be dominated by these big English parties, and it's not going to change. And now the third one is coming. There's going to be a turbocharged version of the Tory party. That's what we're going to get.
Yeah, and if we had PR, you'd be unlikely to have a party with an overall majority. So already that weakens their power base. Yes, that's interesting, because it did sort of occur to me, even if we had all 59, so what? What does that get us right now? Nothing.
So it's really helpful what you've just said about, we can't know how it would pan out if it was a PR system for the UK, but 20 MPs might end up being significant, depending on how things go. Would it need to be a PR system that was based on a complete UK-wide setup? I mean, I know that's the simplest and presumably, in a way, the purest way of having a PR system, but in Switzerland, cantons kind of, there's a bit of a different way of doing it. I think even in Germany, couldn't you kind of have a PR system that took into account regions of the UK, of which Scotland would be, a region for the moment, so would Wales?
Yeah, I mean, I think any PR system would naturally do that because as you said, no one gets a majority. I mean, that's only happened with Scotland. And New Zealand on one occasion, and it almost happened in Germany. And what they have in common is they share the mixed member system, right? So they've got a first past the post element, and then it's offset by the list element beside that. So it's PR, and that means it's good. It's not as PR as other models, and so that's the beginning. But what it means is that you have to do deals, and that means that things like regional interests and other core interests come to the fore. So you remember we spoke about on the first time I came on In the Netherlands, early in the year or last year, its government had had 4 parties, amongst which was one called the Farmers' Party, and it was almost like a single issue party. And its issue was that it wanted to alleviate the pressure on nitrogen pollution reduction. If you think of it, so this affects obviously thousands of farms and tens of thousands of people, but largely that was their thing. And that got into Parliament, right? They got into government, they had 6 or 7 seats, and then they were part, of the coalition. So, this is the sort of thing that can happen. Part of the work that I'm doing just now is going to show that why is it that the southeast and the east and the East Midlands of England were the areas that turbocharged the Brexit vote and are now the areas that are going to turbocharge Nigel Farage's reform as they get into power in 2029. And it's all linked to the same thing, but it's to do with the fact that because first past the post allows parties just to major on the marginal seats, right? And that's this group that cuts across England, but across the Midlands and so on. Then they can quite comfortably and tactically, deliberately neglect, right? In the case of the Labour Party, they're poor, deprived seats in Northern England. In the case of the Tory Party, they're middle-class, Middle England seats in East Midlands, East Anglia, and the South East. Right? And it's that neglect, right? You can infer from the data under the first past the post system that has caused these people to rebel, which is what's happening because of the inequality that they're suffering and because the quality of their lives, and as I say in my paper, become downwardly mobile, right? So again, a long-winded sort of like circuitous route to make the point to say like what PR does is it sort of prevents that because these people get angry, but they've got, there will emerge then a voice that will deal with, I don't know, East Anglian farmers or, commuters in the southeast of England. Do something about the fact they can't buy houses because London, the gravity of London is so, so powerful that, house prices go through the roof and so they can't afford it. So it solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, so in a way, those sort of issues you just mentioned just now, they could end up having people in Parliament or who had a PR system and they'd be saying, yeah, well, if you want my support for your budget, you have to do something about commuting into London or house prices into London. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's right.
That's fascinating.
And this is the thing that it just allows themes that become important enough to get to the fore, like, I guess have we seen that in Scotland? Well, I suppose only with the SNP and the Greens. Our problem is, the constitutional question that won't go away until we do something sensible about it, and we all know what that is, right? It's not going to happen overnight. But that's right. So it's really interesting to talk about this because it's such a difficult thing to explain. I've not lived it either. I'm a first past the post baby, as I suppose you are as well. But when you read about these things and you see how that would work, it's pretty compelling,
And of course, Reform are almost a sort of single issue party in terms of immigration. Really, is their only issue, and making billionaires richer. Yes, The Guardian, right? The Guardian. The story they're trying to tell is that Europe without immigration faces population decline. But the thing that struck me when I looked at that was Sweden and the UK are the only two whose current migration projection is actually upwards. The others need migration in order to stay the same or not go down as fast. And it does look there, when you look at it, the UK's level of migration is more extreme than the others, which I hadn't appreciated. I might be reading that wrong, but that's how it looks to me, that graph.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think what this says to me is, if you just look at all of those graphs, right? The outstanding conclusion is if we don't allow migration, we are in a very bad place. So it's really. I was talking to a Dutch guy of the Dutch Labour Party a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the failure, the failure of the left, right? And if you can include us, people that are interested in at least reasserting a sort of a progressive voice in the UK as being on the left, then it's definitely this, is it not? In that we absolutely have to get more people in. We can't do it through conventional means. We're going to have to, allow people to come into our countries. But the narrative is obviously diametrically opposed to that, and you just can't see how it can be changed. We've just lost that battle, or if we want to get on and maintain like the quality of life, then we need people in, And the only way surely is obviously immigration. It's just incredible, isn't it? You look at the data.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I am thinking that Romania looks, I think that's, can't quite read it. I think it's Romania. Looks like it's, it doesn't matter what it does, it's going to lose population.
It's going to close.
Poland's not much better. I mean, there must be other things that are part and parcel, but well, the birth rate is going down all the way. But if you maybe go from a Catholic country where it's been high to that kind of tailing off, then that'll have more of an effect on that particular country, wouldn't it? So, but it is fascinating that.
Yeah.
Also, educating women and women getting into the workplace depresses your birth rate as well. And these are all quite advanced economies now, aren't they? Yeah. But the UK one, it kind of brings back to this idea that Brexit has actually caused an explosion. I'm going to say explosion because the graph's going upwards, of immigration that wasn't the case when there were actual systems that allowed legal migration. And it's the fact that, part of their argument for Brexit was it would reduce the amount of immigration, but it seems to have just taken the brakes off completely. So there is something about the system and the way it operates that clearly isn't operating correctly.
Yeah, I mean, these are projections, aren't they, with migration. They're not like it's not something that's actually happened yet, but they're
it's projections.
They're projections. And also the whole way that Reform and Farage talks about this, no doubt completely deliberately, is to keep talking about immigration, and then you get onto little boats across the channel and wherever, and completely forgetting that most of the migrants, most of the people who come into Britain come on, they're not illegal. There's a massive number that come every year, and they're often, say, from Indian subcontinent. So, they've got the colour of skin that Farage and his, more outwardly racist kind of supporters are against. And it all kind of gets convoluted and, really difficult. I always sort of feel like people must be on the back foot actually trying to untangle the very deliberate woven, storyline that Farage has come up with. Anyway, sorry, that's my anti-reform UK rant.
You're right, though, and you can see that kind of data, you're right, this is a projection, not necessarily how it's going to pan out, but you can see how people would look at that and say, well, we already don't have enough houses, our public services are already stretched, and you're going to double the number of people coming in. So to me, that is the bit that requires a better story, a better narrative, and probably some better actual solutions as to, well, how many people coming in is the right number. And, looking at that, Germany's the one who seems to have got it almost straight on if what they're trying to do is achieve the same number going forward. If you want to bring it down with some of the others, if you want to bring it up, well, some of the others are doing it. But, that it's what is the right number? And is that driven by GDP and population growth narrative rather than what actually is the right number to sustain a healthy population?
Well, I mean, it's partly driven by demographics, isn't it? Because in Western countries, we're all living older. We're living for longer, but we're not in work. So we're not putting anything into the GDP, as it were. We're using up resources like NHS and what have you, but we're not putting anything into what keeps that going, and it's younger people who are in work who do that. So it's kind of, it's just complex.
Then what happens when they get old? You need more people because then there's more older people.
But immigration, because it's typically younger and fitter people that come, then that sort of takes care to some extent of the the reproduction or the next generation to a great extent. I think that's why it's one of the reasons it's given for why Scotland's fertility rate is lower than England's, or certainly it was in the 80s or the 90s, is because just there were more immigrants that went to settle in England than in Scotland proportionally, and that had an impact. But one of the other things that I think is really interesting about that, and again, it's easy to look at the UK and think, oh, we're just like the rest of Europe. We've all got this perception there are too many people coming in, and that data shows that it's not the case. Is that the UK is unique, and this goes back to why reform are so dangerous because of how popular they become, in that it's not just the disenfranchised and the lower income areas of society that are spooked, let's say, by this, the appearance, the perception of being overrun by immigration, right? It is also people much higher up the food chain, right? Back to the point I made about the those regions of England that vote for Brexit, the same regions that are going to vote en masse for Farage. So Farage has managed to create just like an incredible fusion, right, of the traditional English working class, traditional English Tory voting Middle England middle class, and actually the data, certainly from the last MIC More in Common poll in September, suggested that he's going to get almost like 100-seat majority with 31% of the vote, right? And so this is, again, back to why first past the post is so dangerous, right? And the final thing I'd say is that this whole thing that gets called identity, culture, politics, that even the establishment groups, Resolution Foundation, the IFS and so on, all got on board with this. So yeah, the axis of British politics has changed. It's not about class anymore. It's not about working class, it's middle class. It's all about identity. Are you European or pro-European? Are you British, English and so on? It's just sort of like the first past the post narrative that both the Labour Party and the Tory Party are now reform have driven it, a way of explaining away or avoiding having to deal with what is underneath it all fundamentally a problem driven by inequality. They can't deal with that. No one can stand up. No one in Starmer's plan. If they do stand up and say, "Now the problem is inequality. We need to distribute more to the needy," then they end up being treated like Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn, and ostracized, and they die. They're no longer relevant politically. Yeah. It's incredible. You look at the gap and all that stuff you showed earlier. This is the problem. It's nothing to do with culture and Europe and all that. It's nonsense. It's misery, and it's about inequality. And if we continue to ignore that, it's just going to get worse. And of course, Farage is a turbocharged version of your worst Tory nightmare.
Yeah. And I mean, all of those 21 graphs. I mean, the ones we didn't show were the ones that it's obvious it's racial equality, gender equality, social mobility, access to education, money available for children. It's just the entire range of things that we would see as essential for a well-being society. And the more unequal we become, and I saw a projection, I think it was in the Guardian today or yesterday, was that come 2035, it was something like 52 families would have more money than than the UK's GDP, and of course that's money that they're hoarding in their offshore coffers. It's horrific.
I know, it's awful.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yes, this is going out in January, I would think. So by then, people will have had their Christmas. You'll have had your Christmas, yeah. So the last one, the last image that we had, then is right. So this is the Holyrood seats projection, and this is based on having looked at the constituency and the region. And I have some questions about that. But this the seats projection is that the SNP would have 60. So that's not a majority, because you need 65 for a majority. Labour would be on 19, Reform would be on 17, the Greens would be on 17, the Tories on 11, the Lib Dems on 5, and Alba are nowhere to be seen. The thing I wanted to ask you about, Stuart, I remember last time we spoke, did there not also have to be, it was something to do with how evenly spread they were, those votes across the place? Because what strikes me there, the Greens in particular, now I know this is really difficult it's small to read on this screen, but based on their vote share, this is suggesting that in the constituency, they would get 4 seats. I find that curious, and then they've got a projection that of their 17% of the vote on the list, that would get them 13 seats. That's probably more believable. So that's where their 17 altogether comes from. But they don't stand in every constituency, for one thing. They've never won a constituency seat. I'm just wondering if how good is that kind of projection when it comes to that system?
They do stand in, well, I'm sure one of those will be used to be Glasgow Kelvin, because they have stood there before. But presumably what's different now is that in these constituency ones, we've got another player. quite a big player.
Well,
who can upset everything.
Yeah, but they don't, according to this, are not projected to get any seats in the constituencies.
But they can affect who does.
They can affect, yes, they can, and
So,
they might break up what was previous kind of tactical voting groupings as well.
I don't know this for a fact, but my sense would be, okay, this is just another example of PR in action, right? So, and you can infer some of this as well from what happened to the SNP in 2007 and then 2011. So, because of PR, the Greens have had profile, and you've had high profile. I think most people would accept, impressive orators, people like Ross Greer and Patrick Harvey. So they've got a name. The people understand them more. They've been in people's living rooms and so on, right? And now that means then there's just more awareness. In which case, people will think about maybe voting them for a seat, because maybe they'll understand that they can win a seat as well. Whereas, before they maybe would have been, I don't know if it's fair to say an afterthought, but if you've been grown up in a first past the post environment like us, then you tend to treat something of a secondary thing, the list vote, whereas they all matter, they all count the same at the end of the day. Same happened with the SNP when they won their major majority in 2011. A lot of that came from the list, because people still weren't confident, if they wanted to vote for the SNP, that it was worth voting for them in the Glasgow seats. When you look back at that election, we were still pretty surprisingly unrepresented in the seat side of Glasgow, as opposed to the list. And then people, they learn about how the system works. They learn, it's like a subconscious collective thing that goes on. People, this is what's so dangerous about PR. If you are, an establishment British Tory, and you don't want anything to change ever, and the only thing that ever decides anything is the voice of the Tory party south of the River Trent. This is why I think that if there ever was a referendum on PR in the UK, it would be, the mother and father of all battles. It would make Brexit and all the rest look like a walk in the park, because there are so many extremely well-funded and wealthy areas of British life that are going to be hugely at risk when you break the hegemony of the two-party arrangement. It's interesting to see what Farage does if he gets a single-party majority. Will he mess with these people? Maybe they get challenged there, but it won't be the same as it being a coalition of a real social democratic party from England, Scotland, the Liberals and the Greens, that then get power for 5 years with a proper majority, and the sort of way they might choose to deal with establishment wealth and all these things that have never been touched in the UK. So I think that's that. I think we are, and this is another argument I would say for, I don't know, it's not a powerful one, but it is an argument for independence to say, listen, when we get independence, we don't have to go through what the New Zealanders have had to go through. So a quarter of a century coming to grips with it. I mean, this when you look at the results from political elections, you can still feel the hand of first past the post on it, because there's still two big parties that get most of the votes. They still always need, more or less, in most cases, coalitions, but it takes a long time. We hit the ground running in, 10, 15, 20 years with a mature society that understands PR and that has lived with coalitions and their peculiarities and inefficiencies and so on. So you wonder if the slow movement of that itself isn't going to help us. Look at how successful our Green Party is compared to the English Green Party.
And it's the irony as well, though, is that the SNP are banking on getting a majority, which is not what our system is designed to do. It's like, they can't move into this PR space.
I know. Shot himself in the foot, I think.
I don't know. You sort of, from an independence perspective, you think, well, go for it if you think you can get there. But that is, as you point out, there a vestige of our first past the postness.
Yeah,
not
it is.
Culturally, we're still there. But
it's like that's the only thing that counts. And why anybody, if we do end up with 77 pro-indie MSPs, why on earth would you say, well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough because one of those parties didn't get more than they should? It's ridiculous.
Well, Mr. Starmer or Rachel Reeves or someone will probably say, well, Mr. Sweeney, you did say that it was essential to have a majority SNP, and look, you haven't got it, so that's that. We're not talking about it. I just really, really appreciate what you were just saying there, Stuart, about we'd hit, once we are independent, actually, we've got this experience under our belts. Yeah. And, we kind of, start off running, as it were. We don't have to kind of crawl our way towards understanding a PR system. And, it's got its, it's difficult. It's got its quirks and everything. But, we kind of, we've got a population that understand how vote in
how
it,
to do
and
it.
that's really good. That's
great.
fantastic.
I wish it would go further as well, because I want more than 2 votes. I like the council ones where you get to rank as many as you want. Vote till you vote, as they say. There's 3 parties that I would vote for, and I only get to vote for 2 of them, and then I've got to decide what order I'm going to vote for them in. So it's I want more PR.
Well, maybe even that will come.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I've got a paper coming out with a sort of campaign group looking at first past the post in the neoliberal era and its link with inequality that just sets out that discussion, and the end game being Nigel Farage's reform, and its likelihood now of a single party majority, and it covers like all the stuff that we've talked about, the graphs that you put up, and tries to bring to life. It's like a horrible thought, but to make tangible what inequality really means and why it's so dangerous. So that's my thing. But so we'll see.
When can we expect that?
I think sometime in the middle of Q1. I don't know exactly yet.
Well, we'll look out for that. Good.
We'll look out for that. We'll maybe give you a shout when it's out. You can come and walk us through it.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I'd be delighted to do that. That'd be fantastic. Yeah.
So fabulous. Well, thank you very much for spending an hour with us and delving into the graphs with us. That's been really interesting. Your insight, as always, is really appreciated. And we will have you back, I'm sure. So thank you.
Stuff. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.